So, Bree, I'm so excited about your new book. It's so fabulous. Where should we start? Should we talk about maybe how the book came about or?
Sure, we can start with how the book came about. I had been doing the Hood Witch probably for about because I'm celebrating my 10-year anniversary this year. So this was about pre-COVID, I would say right before the pandemic, the lockdown. I received a couple of emails from multiple publishing companies that had an interest in wanting to do a book with me. And a lot of the publishing companies didn't really feel like a great fit at that point in my life. So I politely declined a lot of them. And I really wanted to give some thought and consideration as to like what a book for me would look like. And the first thing that I really initially thought of was doing a very loose, I wouldn't say loose, but just a very different approach to a memoir. Um, a collection of memories, a collection of spells, a collection of my history, my family, our stories, the women in my family, my grandmothers. I really would like to have, I wanted to have that documented. And so that was really the biggest inspiration for me. And at that time, a lot of the publishers that were approaching me, they wanted a very specific formula, a very black and white witch book or new age type of book. And I was like, nah, this doesn't really, that's not me. That doesn't feel right. So I just sat with this and I said, well, what feels good to me? And this is where the heavy visual component comes in, where I was like, I want to stay true to my vision of what the Hood Witch was and has always been, which was lots of art. I love art. I love contemporary art. I love music. I love film. I love, things that are just full of imagination and color and culture and mixing modern and ancient and just having all of those things. So my brain really is, it feels like a collage. So I knew already that my book needed to have heavy visual components to it.
Yeah, and it's such a gorgeous book and has such great aesthetics as you do in your Instagram and everywhere else as well. It's really beautifully printed as well.
Thank you. I actually, and this is something I really pride myself in, I worked with the designer, and every page in that book that is laid out is from me. That was my vision. That was exactly what I wanted it to look like. So maybe that's my new line of work.
No, you can really tell. I mean, when I was looking through it, I was like, obviously you had like a heavy hand in designing this book because it's totally like perfect spot on aesthetics. And if you had handed it over to another designer, yeah, it wouldn't be you. It wouldn't look like that.
Yeah, that was something that was really important for me. So from the jump, I was just like, this book needs to be very symbolic. It needs to represent me and it needs to feel like me. So that was exciting for me, and that's really where it came from. So I started doing blood, sex, magic pre-pandemic lockdown, and I always joke and I say I was really just, I was in shock when I found the right fit, when I found the publishers who said, okay, you want it to be in color, you want to do this type of, memoir style book. Sure, why not? I was like, really? Sure. Okay, let's do it.
Yeah,
And
and
I
it's coming at
just,
the perfect time.
right. And I was just like, but it was such a strange time for all of us, going into lockdown. We really didn't know what was happening. We didn't know if we were going to get sick. We didn't know we're going to die or, what's happening in the world. And I was really scared. And so I spent a lot of time, I didn't feel creative at all. I was scared. I felt afraid. I missed my family, my friends. It was a lot of isolation. And I think most people would say, oh, well, that's a perfect time to write a book, but not really, when you're thinking about your health and you're thinking about your job, or you know what I mean? Like just
Mhm.
everyone's mental health. And it was very, it was just a really rough time.
Absolutely. But you pulled it off.
I did. I pulled from places. It took me roughly, I would say, 2 years, 2.5 years to almost three to complete Blood, Sex, Magic. And I still feel like I can keep going. I want to keep going. This was just, it was such a liberating process, scary, lots of tears, lots of frustration. Um, it's easy, I guess for certain people where there are like ghost writers, or you have someone step in to write for you, and I said absolutely not. This is my family, this is my story, this is my lineage. Why would I want someone else to write that for me?
Yeah, and when it's a real creative work like that, it's really like birthing a book, you know?
Mhm.
And like you said in the book too, witchcraft, you're born a witch. It comes in your blood. It comes through your ancestry. It's knowledge that can't be taken from you. People nowadays, it seems like, are uncovering that knowledge more and more. And it seems really critical as the earth is in such a critical point and societies at such a critical point.
Absolutely. I definitely feel that way, and I really connected and tapped into my own power and magic, I guess you would say, with this process, because, again, when you're writing, you're really sitting in that liminal space. And I had my own rituals to get me in the space, get me in the zone to write. Some days I did not want to write. Some days I didn't feel like writing. I didn't feel motivated. You have that voice of sort of like self-doubt where you're like, no one cares. Everyone cares. Or, it's like that back and forth where it's like, why am I doing this? Well, because this is what you were born to do. Well, why should I do this? So it's like, that constant back and forth, that nagging. And I think a huge part of like magic and transformation and rebirthing and death. And I think this was so perfect too, with like having a book that comes out during Scorpio season and on Halloween. It just, I couldn't have asked for a better date, because to me it feels like it's just come full circle. I do not feel like the same person I was when I started writing the book.
Yeah, and coinciding with 10 years of the Hood Witch.
Completion. It's a cycle of completion. I like just wept. I sat and I cried. I still get like really emotional thinking about it, because I'm like, wow, you really did this for 10 years. I've had put the blood and the sweat and the tears and the sex and the magic. You put that into, this is my work. This is my baby. This is, and the Hood Witch is even a Scorpio too. My website, I launched that in November, and she's a Scorpio, and I'm like, now I have a new book baby that's a Scorpio. So that's a really big, thing for me. I have a Scorpio rising. I have it tattoo. So it's always present in my life, to remember the cycles of life and death and rebirth, and allowing yourself to create and destroy old versions, old stories, old, you know, ideas of yourself, and to not really hold on to anything too much. So I think that's where I'm at right now. I'm really excited to see what is the next phase for me. What happens next?
Yeah, I think everyone who follows you and reads the book and follows the Hood Witch is going to be excited to see what you come up with next.
We'll see. I've been really drawn to wanting to make a film.
It'll be great
You know what I
aesthetics
mean?
as well.
I was like, a lot of people don't know this about me, but prior to starting doing the Hood Witch, when I was in my early, like, I would say like early 20s, like late teens, like maybe 19, 20 years old, I really wanted to go to school for cinematography. And I think that's where my love for like visual art, and I like to call it visual storytelling, where it's like taking art and color or, symbols, things that really speak to people's subconscious. Because I think that a lot of times the visual aesthetic or the visual imagery of something like can take someone and really teleport them to a completely different time, or they'll understand the story better. And that to me is that's magic. That is a form of magic.
Yeah, because you can really paint a picture and like get a full immersion of different senses and things in the work.
Absolutely. And I think that was something I struggled with when I initially started the Hood Witch. Back in the day, like 10 years ago, most witches or like witch Instagrams pages, like it had a very specific formula. And I always laugh at this. It's something I joke about with Pam Grossman, my friend. She always says it's like the black and silver witch aesthetic, or you know what I mean? Everyone had the like, it was very like Celtic witch and like American horror story. Like, and then I was like, well, where do I fit into this? I didn't really fit into that aesthetic. And I was like, well, I'm like a Black Mexican practitioner, and I love like my long, colorful nails and gold jewelry. And, it just more, it felt aligned with my culture and how I expressed myself. And the art that I liked was really colorful. So there was that juxtaposition of like the gothic, which, everyone's like, oh, this is what it's supposed to look like. And I kind of came in and disrupted that and said, no, I don't think this is how I feel. This is my expression of that. And a lot of people really wanted to like minimize me
Hmm.
because they're like, oh well, all she cares about is like the visual aesthetic. And I'm like, well, no shit, like that's what Instagram was for. That was, we were supposed to be telling a story, we were supposed to be sharing art, we were supposed to be, you know what I mean, like that's the beauty of it. If you can create that, if you are a creative person, wonderful. It just so happens that my creativity and my vision was put into my branding. And at that time, I didn't know anything about branding. I was just sharing what I liked.
Mhm.
And it became very distinct with my brand that I had started. And so I think a lot of people wanted to reduce that to just being like, oh, well, this is just an aesthetic. Like real witches do this. And I'm just like, yeah, okay. Like you don't get to define what that means. So I think in my book, it's like no one gets to define you. You are the person, and that's the beauty of even calling yourself a witch and reclaiming that word, having autonomy, having that power to say you don't get to tell me, you don't get to define me, what my practice looks like, what my magic looks like, how that shows up in the world, how that is expressed in the world. And I think a huge part of that was like of me just doing what felt right in that time. And so now we see so many witch brands and businesses, and you see it. Like have gotten newsletters from hotels that are like, we're going to teach you about astrology and the full moon ceremony, and you're like, wait, what? So it's just, it comes full circle, and I love that this, I call it this modern witch renaissance has happened. And I love seeing so many people reconnecting back to their pagan practices and their knowledge of like folk magic and cultural inheritance of, just the stories and the spells, and just, oh, it's so beautiful to see.
Yeah, it's so much richer. And like you talk about in the book as well, like so much of this has been kind of socialized out of people through like colonization and patriarchy. And it's just really wonderful and important to see so many people like getting back to their roots and grabbing their magic and trusting their intuition again, rather than constantly feeling like we've all been told, oh, you're crazy, you're the hysterical woman, what's going on with you, like, be a good girl, get in line, we can control you, you know.
Absolutely. And that was something, that I spoke about in the sex chapter, I believe it was. It's like why I really had such a love and admiration for the witch, or, as a little girl, many times like the over sexualized woman was always seen as being like evil, and I'm like, no, she's pretty fucking cool. I'm like,
Mhm.
I want to be that. Like, I want to be the sexy witch. I love that. But I also have such a love of the hag. I love just the witch in every embodiment, you know what I mean? And I think that that's such an exciting thing for me. I love that so many women and women identifying people are just like, fuck you. Like, I don't care about these patriarchal standards of like, as you were saying, like getting in line and being quiet and shutting up, and it doesn't matter what you think, or it's not real science, or because it's not proven by a white man at a university, it's not real. And it's
Mhm.
like, no, I'm sorry, I don't subscribe to that. Like, I believe that there's room for many types of science and information, but I don't subscribe to this idea. I guess that's always been my problem too. We were talking about, I wrote about that in my book, um of being this like adolescent and getting in so much trouble. I was always asking the questions that I was curious about, and people at church didn't like that. Christian men and women did not like this little girl asking questions, and they really shamed me and made me feel bad. And I wrote about a story that one of my oldest memories, I was not joking, probably about 5 years old. And I was taken to a babysitter, and she was like a really religious, strong Black Baptist woman. And I remember coloring at the table in her house because she had like a little daycare, and she was giving us the crayons to play with. And I remember I was coloring with my left hand, and she squeezed my hand. She grabbed my hand and she said, "You don't write with the devil's hand." And I was like, "What? What the fuck is the devil's hand? The left hand?" I was like, I'm 5 years old. What does that mean? So that was something that stuck in my mind, where I'm like, how could you do that to a child? What does that even mean? What is that? You know what I mean? Like,
Psychotic.
how could you do that to a child? So my experiences, growing up, especially like as a Black and Mexican woman, and living in Los Angeles, and during this time, I always say that like kids have it easier now, where it's like growing up listening to like black metal or like punk or like glam rock, or just having more influences outside of your cultural norm. Like, I was a fucking weirdo. I liked the Rocky Horror Picture Show. I liked David Bowie. I loved just things that were not considered the norm for what people in my community thought I should be into. And I was really criticized and picked on a lot for that. And I never really cared though. I didn't care. And that's what I love so much about Little Bree, where I'm like, oh, the little witch, that is who I was. I was just so unapologetic and so unapologetically myself. And I found my group of like, this is what I told people, I start laughing. I think I wrote about this in the book too. Creating my own coven when I was like in junior high, and we're like, we're gonna put spells on boys. So I would like go to, and this is, I think, where also, my love, and I talk about this a lot. I've had such a love for books and a literary fascination. And that comes from my grandma, Sylvia. She was an avid reader. She taught me how to read when I was 4 years old at her kitchen table with the National Enquirer. Or she had those other, like just like really trashy, like grocery store magazines.
Yeah, like
So
you said,
we
with Bat Boy on the
with
cover
Bat
and
Boy.
things.
I mean, that was how I learned how to read, like reading about Bat Boy and like UFOs and like, JFK is a UFO like just weird shit like that. So I grew up with that, and my grandmother loved like mystery, like murder stories and like true crime books. So I grew up with such a love and such an affinity for literacy and books that it just opened up a new world for me. I worked in my school library, and I would steal the books that I that I really
Yeah.
wanted. I was like, oh, and that's like that's like the beginning of like my book hoarding really started. But yeah, I mean, I can go on forever, but truly, like the little baby witch inside of me, there was always this hunger for more information, more knowledge. I loved magic. I loved learning about the tarot. I loved the idea of changing my reality and changing my circumstances and having like familiars and learning about these like women who were powerful, And so at that time, I think I was really, learning because, in most bookstores, it was like new age books and like pagan, primarily focused on like Wicca and things like that. So that's what I thought. The only thing about, I only thought that was witchcraft, but not knowing in my own family, as we get deeper into my book and we start talking about my grandmother, Althea, who's from the South, just from Texas. And I had a step grandmother named Eula. I didn't really talk too much about her in my book, but she was from Louisiana. And I learned, I mean, over time, I didn't believe that. I didn't think that my grandmothers were quote unquote witches because to me, they didn't look like the representation that I saw in these books. What I
Hmm.
saw in these books, were like ethereal like white women and like fairies and like just like I said, very Wiccan pagan type things, but there was nothing about like African spirituality or conjure or voodoo or hoodoo or you know what I mean. I
Hmm.
never had those resources, but not knowing that they were already there, and because I didn't see it as witchcraft, I just thought, oh, they're superstitious. And as I got older, I was like, oh, and reclaiming and coming back to my family's practices, I said, oh shit, it's been here all along. No wonder this little girl, has this fascination. I'm like, girl, like this is in your blood. This is your lineage. These traditions are not something that I learned about from a book, and I share certain recipes. And there's some stuff that I don't share because, I just think that they're not to be like a gatekeeper, but there's certain things I think with African American traditions that are passed down orally, and they're just things that are kept in your family.
Hmm. Yeah, and that's good. Like you said, sometimes the witch needs her privacy and doesn't say exactly how things are done most of the time.
I think that I would have to say that most books on witchcraft or spell work, you get a version. Do you get 100% of every single bit of knowledge that they know? Absolutely not. Do you receive bits of information that are helpful? I put out into my book, and I'm being very honest with you. The things that I shared in my book are things that I feel confident and I feel good with sharing. This is from my practice. This is from my experience. This is the way that I've learned things in my family. This is not to say this is the end all and be all of anyone's magical practice. So it is why, I say in my book, I'm like, take what you need, take what works for you. But don't limit yourself to the way that I'm practicing, because this is how it was taught to me. This is from my experience, my lived experience. This is how this has worked for me.
Yeah, exactly. And the best way is to like use it as a starting point or inspiration, and then people can kind of play with spells in their own way and like make them work for them through their practice and intuition.
Absolutely.
It's great. And I love how you talk about very practical things though, and how people can integrate magic into their day-to-day life in very like material ways, and that there's nothing like mundane versus like supernatural, like it's all kind of together, you know?
Yeah, that's, I think that's a huge part of how I live my life. There is, I mean, yeah, sure, there, like, not everything when you wake up is going to be like a magic spell. I'm like, I still have to go grocery shopping and doing my laundry, but when I am doing my laundry, there is intention. If I've had like an especially heavy or like shitty interaction with someone, or and I'm wearing a specific thing, or if my house just feels dirty, if there's a new season, I make floor washes. I do, like, even when I'm doing my laundry, like adding some Florida water in, like doing, rituals with my the cleaning of my house. So it's like there's just so many things I grew up with that I now see like, oh, that was so witchy.
Hmm.
That was so magical. But the way that my grandmothers and my aunts and my mom like implemented these things, it just became second nature. I didn't see it as being magical or mundane. I just saw it as just tradition just existed. You just did it.
It's wonderful. I grew up in Miami, so I'm fortunately got to be around a lot of like Santeria and voodoo
Mhm.
and the colorful magic. That's to me like, yeah, that's where it's at.
That's my favorite thing, like growing up. And I mean, even still to this day, I love going into, no matter where I'm at in the world, if they have a botanica or they have like a witch supplies store, I'm always just so drawn to them. I want to see what's in there. I want to buy their candles. I want to buy everything. But every store has its own energy too. So that's always been a fascination for me. But yeah, I've always just really enjoyed like the colors of the candles and like the smell. Like I can really visualize the botanica I'd go to a lot with my grandmother in South Central. And it's so sad because during COVID, they actually closed down. And it was like one of the last big like warehouse botanica supply stores. I've heard things that they may have like reopened. I'm not sure, but they were a huge pillar within the community of buying candles and getting information. And I was always so nosy too as a kid, because I loved like seeing, and even now as an adult, when I go to the botanica, like I love seeing what's in people's carts. Like, ooh, what are they doing? Like, what are they like? I'm so nosy, but I'm like, ooh, like what candles are they getting? Or like what oils are they buying? Like, but for the most part, I always see people buying like love spell stuff. And I'm like, oh God, they're not worth it. Don't put it back. They're not worth it.
Yeah, if you need to do that, then they're not worth it.
Save your energy. And believe it or not, there were like a lot of men that would be in the botanica buying like stuff to like love magic spells to put on, I'm assuming, like their significant others. So I
I
love being
believe it.
nosy. I'm like, I
I,
love being nosy.
I love on you talk about a little bit in the book too, but on your Instagram once in a while you post about like just cut people off, you know.
Yes,
I
cut
just
them.
hope I want like young women and femmes to just like get to that point like much faster. Like just cut them off. They're not worth it. Like the more you cut old bad patterns out, the faster you'll get people that like resonate with you in a good way in, you know.
Interestingly enough, I learned from an elder. He told me something, and it always stuck with me about love spells. He said that if you've come to the point where you are then channeling your energy into someone to reciprocate love and respect for you, you've already you've already submitted yourself to be in their control. So regardless of how this spell, the energy that you're investing into it and putting into this ritual, you are already at their mercy because they're not worried about you. They're not thinking about putting the spell on you for your love, your attention, your affection, your admiration, your respect. You are seeking that from them. So you're already at their mercy. And I always just sort of stuck with that where I'm like, shit, like he's right. Like I'm the one that's buying all of these supplies and like trying to make this person love or respect me. Like, fuck that, And that's where I think I reached this point where I was like, it's good. Love and sex magic. I love that in relationships where it is reciprocated, you can create some pretty powerful shit, when you're both in union together and you both decide this is something that we want to commit to together. We
Mhm.
want to be bound together. We want to create this spell together. And that love is just, it feels good. But I think that whenever you really feel like called to utilize magic or your energy and your resources into putting a spell of love on someone, it's just like you already lost. No, I've seen it. I've seen too many things go wrong. And of course, I've lived and learned. I've been the baby witch. I've been the dumbass. I've done so many like stupid things. But I think that's the beauty also too in witchcraft. That's why I don't like judging anyone's practice. I really don't. If you do love spells and they work for you and you feel good about that, then more power to you. I am in no position, obviously, I will never judge someone's practice, what they do, and what works for them. I'm just saying, like, for beginners and sort of like novice practitioners, be careful. But that's with anything. Just, I think, just be responsible for your energy and be responsible for your magic. And if anything, invest that into yourself, channel that into yourself, because maybe what you're seeking from someone who isn't showing you or reciprocating the admiration or affection for you, you are longing for within yourself. And I think that you can never go wrong in self enchanting and, worshiping yourself and making yourself feel so powerful, so good, that you don't really need someone else to validate you and invalidate that.
Absolutely. No, I definitely there was like a specific turning point in my life where I just had this realization of like, what if I stopped investing all this energy that I put into these relationships that are like just like dragging me down and I just like cut them off and I like invest that energy in myself. And that was maybe like 10 years ago. My life is so much better now.
Right. And see, I was like, it sounds so cliche, and people are like, just love yourself. Just love yourself. But it's like, that is magic to me. Self-love is like, I attended the class with Morbid Anatomy about Anton LaVey, and I fucking love him because, self-adoration, self-admiration, self-love is a very satanic, is a very satanic, what would that be, like a tenant?
Yeah.
And so
Mhm.
that to me, I think I always joke about this with my friends where I'm like, oh, I was a natural born Satanist, but I'm like, I don't obviously like walk around where I'm like, I'm satanic, I'm a Satan. But I'm like, a lot of the things I do agree with like LaVeyan Satanism. But obviously like the form of like self-love and admiration, it will change your life. It truly will. And I think it's okay to be selfish with your power and your magic and your confidence. And that's how you build a strong practice. You need to know yourself, have a relationship to self, and don't seek out, again, like I keep reiterating this, I guess, even in my book, it's like, don't seek out the approval from anyone else outside of yourself.
Yeah, but it's really important. It's an important point in the society, like patriarchy, white supremacy is one hand, and then also like this whole Christian narrative of like you should just like drain yourself and martyr yourself for everybody else, and it doesn't work for people. It's not healthy. It's not good. As
It
a psychologist, I feel like everyone comes in and have to like help them learn to like stop doing that because it's just no good for anyone and it doesn't benefit the other people either.
That's where it makes me laugh because there is a quote in my book, and I made sure that it was like very prominent, where it says, "I'm a witch, not a saint." And to me, it was like, I'm not going to become a martyr. I'm not going to sacrifice myself for you. I will never do that, because I think, especially for Black women and women of color and women just in general, and as we were saying, women and femmes and queer people, it's like we have had to sacrifice and hide and play small and be subservient and be so quiet, and it's just no, no, you're not doing that anymore. It's the times have changed, and I love seeing, again, like, just this demonic feminine, wild, like Lilith energy, Babylonian energy, Babylon, I'm just like, I love that, like, demonic feminine. I love this, like, resurgence of the dark feminine and having these themes around shadow work and not hiding away from it, because we've seen in phases, right, with like this witch resurgence. So like in the 60s we had this like psychedelic wave where everyone was discovering like acid and like Eastern philosophy and all of those types
Mm.
of things. So, and then we have like the Satanism, and then like the 70s it was like astrology and new age and all those type of things. But I feel like the 80s had that like very culturally appropriative, like, new age, I'm a shaman. Like that's where we have like crystals, and we have the 90s, so it's like goes into like Wicca and the craft and like gothy, like paganism. And so now we're in this space where it's like, well, what is this era of the witch resurgence look like? Or you know what I'm saying? Like what does that look like? And I think it looks really fucking cool because there's so many people who are culturally tapping in. And this is something I spoke to in the beginning of our interview. There are so many people now tapping back into their ancestral lineage and magic. Like there are so many people that when I look on Instagram, I found this really cool group. I can't remember their name off top, but I believe that they're like from Siberia,
Mm.
and they practice a form, it's like all women, they practice a form of traditional throat singing,
Mm.
and their pagan roots, and they're doing the shamanic like drumming, and they're wearing their like cultural outfits, and they're telling stories that have been passed down through like oral tradition. Do you know what I'm saying? So it's like
Mm.
seeing these, I have like Romanian witches that I follow, and seeing them now in like 2023, sharing their like spells and their culture and their magic. I'm just like, wow, this is so beautiful. I'm like, it makes me want to cry, where I'm like, I love seeing this. I love seeing how like the church tried to destroy all of us and try to get rid of us. And I was like, the witch lives in all of us because she's never died. And I was like, the witch has never died. And that wild spirit, that essence, that soul, that like, fuck you, is always going to live throughout, the essence of time.
That's right. I like it. And yeah, I mean, I always think of like because like in psychology and psychoanalysis, everyone seems to understand like intellectually how colonialism has like made things unfair for the global south and disadvantaged black people and things like that, but they don't seem to understand how it's also stigmatized magic and witchcraft. And I feel like I'm always there like trying to get them to see that. I don't know if they ever will, but but it's really heartening to see. This is all tied together. Like colonization wouldn't have happened without like Catholicism, Christianity, and everything. And it's like led to capitalism and this rampant society that we have that's just like destroying the earth and people at like every turn. And it's really has tried to destroy everybody's individuality and all these different cultures. And yeah, it's not working. And at the end of the day, yeah, this version of society is so short. Like you said before, like this knowledge may not be like scientific knowledge made by a white man in a university, but it's knowledge that's been passed down for like thousands and thousands and thousands of years. So how
Since the
does this
beginning of time, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
so how does this little white man at the university think that like what he's developed over like the past like 150 years is more important than what's been going on for thousands of years? It's like absurd, you
And
know?
you know what's even funnier is that when we're seeing this resurgence of like psychedelics and ayahuasca and mushrooms, and you're like, are you kidding me? This is indigenous medicine. This has
Mhm.
been in the jungles. This has been in the rainforest. This has been a tradition. These are traditions that have been upheld by the shaman, by the gatekeepers of wisdom and of knowledge, and they're entrusted in their villages to have this knowledge and to pass it down. And then of course we have, like I said, white men going into jungles and they're like, wow, what's this? Like, we found out about mushrooms, and we have like Maria Sabina, in Mexico. We have elders who have been in these mountains teaching this indigenous medicine to her community and healing her community. And then of course, when you have scientists come in from universities, and then they get to pick and choose, oh wow, this works. Oh, I had a experience, I went on a journey, so now I'm going to take this back to the cities. I'm going to take this back. It's still a form of colonialism. It's like spiritual terrorism to me, where I'm like, you go into the rainforest, you're taking sacred medicine, and now you get to repackage it as like a drug. We're gonna get trippy, and I'm gonna like expand my consciousness. It's like, no,
And sell it.
this, yes, and sell it. And it's like, why are we now in 2023 finally getting to a place where we're like, well, maybe there are some benefits to working with psychedelics, maybe. And it's like, bitch, we've been saying this, and our elders have been saying this for like hundreds of years, and you called them savages. And it's like, I look at this and I'm just like, on one hand, yes, wonderful, the masses are waking up to you know other forms of healing outside of Western big pharma, but at what expense? At whose expense? And I think that that's why it's so important for me, specifically as a practitioner of magic, and in someday being an ancestor, to share my thoughts and my art and my story and my memories, and to keep these pieces of our culture and history alive, and a part of my history that I have stepped in and I've created in this realm of magic, and this legacy that I'm building as a Black and brown woman. that I now get to be immortalized in a book. And I always say that because I think that books are these little time capsules. They're moments in time that we can look back from hundreds of years ago. These were sacred. Books are sacred and they hold so much power. And I think about, the future where I said, well, what if 100 years from now, someone finds my book and finds my story? They're like, who is that? Like, who is this? Like, what is that? Like, there was a black witch. There's a black Mexican witch that, made all these colorful things in this weird, archaic box. What is this? It gives me such a thrill. It gives me such joy to now be responsible in a sense for preserving my grandparents' wisdom as well as my own. So that's why I guess I laugh when I say I'm the ancient future, or I'm like, I love that concept. So I'm really, really grateful that I was able to create this book and hopefully inspire people who pick it up and buy it. And if you connect with it, then wonderful. If even just one person connects with my book outside of myself and outside of my realm, my circle of people, then that means that I've done my job.